ngayon ay patuloy pa rin ang opensiba ng Israel Forces sa teroristang Hamas at napakarami na ang napatay ng Israel sa teroristang grupong ito. Kaya sobra na ngayon ang takot ng teroristang Hamas, at kung hindi daw titigil ang Israel sa pambubomba na kaliwat kanan at walang tigil sa pagsupil sa kanila, ay papatayin daw ng grupong Hamas ang kanilang mga bihag na dala-dala. Ganun kasama ang teroristang ito na kahit mga bata at matanda ay kanilang papatayin. Para itigil ng Israel Forces ang paglipol sa kanila, dahil alam na ng Hamas na nasusukol na sila at wala na silang tatakbuhan. Dahil sa ngayon ay tukoy na ng Israel ang tunnel na pinagtataguan o pinagkukublihan ng Hamas. Kaya nangangatog na ang tuhod ng mga Hamas sa ngayon at nananawagan na sila ng tulong sa kapwa nilang terorista na Hezbollah ng Lebanon. At gayon din nananawagan sila ng tulong sa mga Arab countries dahil wala na silang pupuntahan at mabubura na nga sila sa ibabaw ng lupa, ayon sa ipinahayag ng Israel Prime Minister na si Benjamin Netanyahu.
היעד הראשון
and not accessible to any terrorist again. It's still not completed, still not back to how it was before, and there is lots of work to do, but that is where we are now. We've mobilized more than 360,000 reserves, and the reserve soldiers are here around the Gaza Strip, in various locations in the south, center, north and northeast of the Gaza Strip. We're talking about ground units, infantry, artillery, armor, combat engineers, intelligence, logistic troops, etc. are all in their vehicles, tanks, APCs and artillery pieces, guns focused at Gaza, and they are preparing for their next mission. The situation in Gaza is escalating, and Hamas, I'm sure by now, after 7 days, almost 7 days of fighting, is feeling what a terrible strategic mistake they did when they showed their barbarity and cruelty to the world, and when they executed and killed so many Israeli civilians. Today we are striking in Gaza, all over the Gaza Strip. There's not one single location where we're not striking from the air. We are targeting Hamas and its infrastructure. Everything that supports their military capability to fight us is a legitimate target, and we are striking those targets. So any house used by Hamas operatives is a target. Other facilities, like offices where they plan attacks or execute attacks, is a target. Places where they hide rockets, places where they fire rockets from, locations where their senior terrorists are hiding because they're cowards and they're not fighting out in the open. They're capable of butchering our civilians, but when it comes to fighting against our military, they're not very brave. So they're hiding under the ground in their tunnel network. We target that as well. Regarding the humanitarian situation in Gaza, it is indeed a challenging situation, no two words about it. But what we are trying to do is the right thing. We issued a notice to all of the population that lives in northern Gaza, basically this entire area here. We told them we're going to enhance our combat operations in northern Gaza, in Gaza City. For your own safety and for the safety of your families, move south. Now, in order to be clear about where we want them to go, not just a general direction, so if we focus in on Gaza City here, which is the center of Hamas's operations, this is where they stockpile weapons, this is where most of the commanders are, this is where they plan the attacks, this is where they coordinate their efforts against us. So this is really the hub of Hamas's activity. That is what we're going to focus on, and we want the civilians to go from Gaza City south of this thing here. That's the Gaza River, which is clear, and everybody in Gaza knows what the Gaza River is. So we're telling people, go south to the Gaza River, and you can come back only when we will inform you that it is safe to come back. And we're doing it out of respect for human life, because we know it's the right thing to do, and we don't want the civilians to be affected any more than they are by the fighting. Do you know who is trying to stop the evacuation of civilians? Hamas, the very same terrorist organization that brought all this destruction and carnage upon us, upon Israel and on the Gaza Strip, is now telling civilians in Gaza, don't go south. Why? Because they want them there. They want the civilians to stay there so that Israel can be blamed for anything that happens to them. How cynical is that? Not only does Hamas govern the entire Gaza Strip, not only do they use civilians as their human shields, and this has been documented for years. In each and every encounter, each and every war or operation against us, they use their civilians as human shields. They use civilian buildings for their military purposes, which, by the way, is a war crime, for those of you who have an affinity to point out war crimes. They also hide behind civilians, and they also have built a network of tunnels that isn't used by the civilians. They're not allowed to go down and seek shelter from what's happening above the ground. This is only for Hamas, for them to be able to fight. So that's the situation, and how cynical is it that we are trying to evacuate Gazan civilians, and Hamas is trying to prevent it. Hopefully, the civilians in Gaza will understand what's best for them, and they'll move south of the Gaza River here, and we will be able to operate with less or with no civilians in the area. That's the situation as we speak now in the Gaza Strip. Our troops are prepared. We're preparing for the next stage of operations, and we all understand. I've personally fought inside the Gaza Strip, and so have many of my colleagues in the IDF. It is a very challenging combat environment. It's dense, it's populated, it's narrow, there's very little room to maneuver, and most importantly, it's governed by a terrorist organization that has had time, resources, and the warped thinking to actually prepare the entire Gaza Strip for combat and to use the civilians as their human shields. So we know that if there's a ground maneuver, it will be a very difficult challenge, and that's what we're preparing for. The objective is to dismantle the military capabilities of Hamas. That's what we want to do. We don't define the civilians as our enemy, because they're not, and we don't try to hit anything that isn't related to military activity. We focus our actions on the military components of Hamas until we will be able to dismantle them totally and fundamentally change the situation and the security along our border. Let's speak a little bit about what's going on in the north. The last 12, 18 hours, we've seen a spike in attacks from the north, made by Hezbollah and officially claimed by Hezbollah. They have said, yes, we have done this. Hezbollah has fired an anti-tank missile, actually two. Hezbollah has tried to infiltrate. Hezbollah has dispatched numerous drones into Israeli territory, and recently, just a few minutes ago, Hezbollah fired an anti-air missile towards an Israeli aircraft, which thankfully was successfully intercepted by our air defense units. The bottom line is, however, that Hezbollah is definitely escalating the situation in the north. The common denominator between Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, we actually have to zoom out in order to see the common denominator. We have to zoom out quite a lot and look at the entire Middle East until we get to this country, Iran. Even though it's 600 miles away, or 1,000 kilometers, Iran is virtually on our doorstep, at our doorstep. And the common denominator between Hezbollah and Hamas is that both are funded, equipped, and guided by the world's number one state sponsor of terrorism, and that is the Islamic Republic of Iran. And that does not elude our attention. An important thing happening in the Mediterranean, and we've spoken about this before, is the presence of a US battle group, led of course by the world's largest aircraft carrier, the USS Ford, which is within tactical distance of the Lebanese coast and the Israeli coast, and is here in order to send a clear message of stability and an effort to prevent further escalation in the area. And that's a very important message for anybody watching and thinking about escalating the situation and fighting against Israel. I have to mention again the hostages. We are doing everything we can in order to find more information and in order to devise a plan and then execute it, how to get our hostages out. Our Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, said very clearly, we will not rest until all of them are back home. And we will finish this war with a defeated Hamas, dismantled totally of its military capabilities, and when the security situation around the Gaza Strip will be changed fundamentally. Those are our aims. So after a week of warfare, we find ourselves in a very challenging situation, in a war that we didn't start and that we didn't ask for, that was forced upon us by some of the most brutal attacks ever seen in modern history. We are happy to see, and it warms our hearts, that there is such an outpour of support for Israel by the foreign ministers of the US, the UK, the European Union, France, Germany, and many, many others that have not only said but made action, came to Israel, visited Israel, and saw firsthand the atrocities that were done against our civilians. And it's important that everybody around the world, every freedom-loving nation and person, will continue to support Israel, the good, against Hamas, which is the evil. And that may sound simplistic, but that's as simple as it needs to be. We are fighting a force of evil, and we are focused on defeating it, and we will not rest until it is defeated. I would like to say that I hope next week will be better than this, but we know that we are in for a long, challenging, and difficult time. We're committed, we're focused, we are equipped and ready to fight until we dismantle Hamas. If you like our content, please share it with your friends, and make sure that anybody who cares or has an opinion about things happening in the Middle East sees our content and understands our perspective. I thank you for watching, and I wish you all the best.